Thank you. 안녕하세요. Thank you so much to KPF for having me here. It's really an honor. I'm so grateful to be able to speak with you all today, especially after dinner. Thank you for those who have stuck around. I'll try to make this as energizing as possible. You've heard a lot today about what AI can do, the potential, the power, I think a lot of excitement around how it can aid in our journalism. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my team at the Washington Post. We're called Visual Forensics, and we work on a lot of what Charlie actually alluded to in terms of the verification. So journalists making sure that images, videos, information have not been altered or manipulated by AI. And we do that through a variety of ways, but I'll go into that in a bit more detail. We are specifically a team that looks for visual information and open source evidence. So that means information that anyone has access to, as opposed to a closed source that might be a source of yours that you interview that isn't accessible to everybody. Open source is things you can find on the internet. We use that with more traditional investigative techniques to produce documentaries and multimedia stories that focus on accountability. So this is just a sampling of some of our work. It spans topic. It does not focus on a particular beat. But what it does have in common is that visual evidence that I mentioned earlier and that open source material. So these are just a few examples, but you'll see we covered the insurrection of the Capitol on January 6th. We've covered an IDF raid in the West Bank using 3D modeling to reconstruct a scene. A deadly shooting in Uvalde, Texas at an elementary school, a drone strike in Kabul, tracking a migrant ship in Greece, really spans the gamut. Just wanted to give you kind of a sense. And so you might wonder how we choose stories. What is our selection story process? We usually ask ourselves these 4 questions. So is this a visual story? Can we use visuals to help find something new? Who can we hold accountable? Is there a disputed narrative? Are officials saying things that conflict with one another? Can visual reporting add new or relevant information about the event? So really thinking about what can be new here, what has not been reported yet, and would uncovering this have impact? Will this resonate with our readers? What is not up there, which again I think is more relevant to our conversations around AI today, is also on that verification piece of it. So when news breaks, we are often some of the first in the Washington Post newsroom who will really analyze video, look to confirm where and when it happened to make sure that not only is the content not being used in a misleading way, but that it's also not faked in some way. So the conference today asked me to speak a bit about our journalism and what captivates readers, what resonates with them, what sets us apart, how to keep people reading, which I'm sure is a challenge you all face, and then the role of a journalist in the new age of AI. So those are the things that I'll cover today. In terms of what sets my team apart at the Washington Post, Visual Forensics, we sit within a growingly competitive group of organizations. The New York Times has a visual investigations team that started before ours did. The BBC, CNN, several other outlets are starting to move into this space of visual reporting and news gathering. Our team, I think, focuses the most on breaking news, what we can respond to quickly when people are looking for answers, exclusive findings, as well as a visual-first approach. So as you'll see here, these are a smattering of headlines within just the first few weeks of the Gaza-Israel war breaking out. Our relatively small team worked around the clock in trying to verify what visuals we could of the initial Hamas attack, as well as the attacks that have now been happening in Gaza over the last few weeks. And we moved very quickly, right? So having kind of a sense of the amount of content that we produce and what we focus on speaks to that breaking news element. And then the next thing that I'll talk about shows instances in which we might move very quickly and then take a bit of time and go deeper. So I wanted to talk about a story that you all are very familiar with, and I apologize, it is a very dark topic, as are most of the things that we cover. But a year ago, when this whole crowd crush occurred, one of the reporters on our team, Joyce Lee, with the time difference, started to see what was happening, and she immediately started pulling videos down from social media, verifying where they happened and when, and mapping out where exactly the crowd crush happened. We published that within a few hours, and then, as you'll see in the top line there, updated it the next day and speaking to experts about what could have been done to better control crowds, who analyzed the videos that we had pulled. So that was an important kind of, again, quick turning story that we moved really quickly. And then a few weeks later, so you'll see the time date there, November 16th, we published a piece focused on the lapses in medical attention that we showed through analyzing, I think, over 300 videos that actually folks in our Seoul Bureau helped solicit. By analyzing those, we showed the delay in which it took medical personnel to evacuate people from the crush. I think it was 26 minutes that it took from the initial reports of the crush happening to actually getting people to safety. So through that visual analysis, we were able to arrive at that finding of that kind of delay in care. I saw recently, actually, an article in the AP that on the year anniversary, families of victims have been advocating for a more official investigation into what happened. So you'll see deeper reporting like this on an event through analysis of the visuals can reveal a lot. And I'll show a bit more on how we do that in a moment. The other piece I mentioned is exclusivity. So you'll see in these headlines, they all have in common an exclusive tag. That means you can only read about it at the Washington Post. Another news organization is not going to be telling you about it. And I think that's something that we also really prioritize in our work, is trying to, again, bring that new piece of information. Lastly, the visual component that I talked about. I'll just play this, it should work. But this story was about how climate change has increased flooding, and that our federal emergency management agencies' maps are quite outdated. They're not keeping up with the pace of climate change. But we showed that through the videos of flooding and maps and overlaying those two pieces of information. And it took what I think could have been a more bland story and made it something a lot more engaging and interesting. So I'll go into a bit more of the techniques and how we do this, and kind of pull back the curtain and some of those stories that I just talked about. The three kind of steps is very similar to the reporting that I'm sure you all do in a more traditional, maybe print or writing sense. Discovery is really that reporting phase. You're looking for sources. You're trying to, find out the basic information of what you're reporting on, the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, why. And then organizing that. So we really treat our visual information almost as data, and trying to put together a set of events. And then analysis of those visuals ultimately lead to the findings. So I'll talk a little bit about the discovery process. A lot of this I'm sure you all do already, but can just break down some more examples. So the first place we often look is social media. This is just a smattering of the different platforms. But I think what we really focus on is trying to prioritize the social media platform that is most relevant maybe to that country or to that event. So you'll see on the right here, we reported on a concert in Texas in 2021, I believe it was now, where 9 people died. And for that, our one of our primary platforms that we went to was TikTok. This was a very young crowd. They were all filming, all posting videos, and posting them more often to TikTok and Instagram. For something like the Ukraine war, the Gaza-Israel war, we rely a lot on Telegram. That's increasingly where people are posting videos and images. We've tried to expand our reporting into China, especially as our journalists are no longer there. So this work becomes increasingly important when we don't have access to certain places, like China or like Gaza. And for China, for instance, we've worked with our researchers and reporters to access WeChat or Weibo, where people are posting those things more readily. The next kind of category, I apologize, the lawmaker space is very large, is kind of more official sources. So you'll see these photos are from the wire services, potentially Associated Press, it might be one of them. But those are really important for us. And I would think of that in Korean media as, trusted news organizations or trusted sources that are going to have photographs of an event. These are all from the January 6th insurrection, which I imagine most of you had followed, but it would kind of be like if a group of rioters stormed the National Assembly building so that, President Yoon would not be president. It was a really unprecedented event, but there were so many visuals for our team to analyze. So these wire photographs were very essential because in the metadata, which is a term for almost like the DNA of a photo or a video, it tells you the time and the place of where it was taken. We were able to get the timestamps. So this scene is one of the last lawmakers evacuating to safety, and that timestamp allowed us to know when that happened in understanding the course of that day. These images on the right were from lawmakers themselves, and again gave us that kind of insider look and understanding into where they were when that day. These in particular are boxes actually with the votes that lawmakers were placing to certify Joe Biden as president. So this exemplifies, again, the importance of speaking to witnesses, not only to understand what they saw that day, but ask, do they have any visual material? Did they take a photo or a video? Did they text a loved one what was happening in that moment to allow you to better piece together what happened? We also use satellite imagery. This is a growing area, again, especially in places where you might not have access. So, for instance, in Gaza right now, there have been several internet blackouts or lack of internet and communication where we actually can't access some of those videos that we often would look to report out what's happening. But satellite imagery can give us an idea from above of what stories might need to be told. This photo here was a story we did earlier this year on how crematoriums in China were seeing an increase in activity despite the Chinese government downplaying the death count of COVID, which was actually rising at the time. So just through satellite imagery alone, as well as in combination with on-the-ground reporting, we were able to kind of put into question what the official government account was at the time. This image over here is actually satellite imagery of Russian-associated ships going back and forth between North Korea and Russia, which again brings into question kind of what relations are in the war, what North Korea might be providing to Russia, and was exclusive satellite imagery that was able to shed more light on that. Lastly, CCTV footage, which I know is hopefully abundant here, allows us to often say a lot more about a story. This photo is actually CCTV footage from a store that overlooked where George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And again, you'll see that timestamp there. It allowed us to to determine how long the police officer was holding him down, which was much more information than we would have seen from just the Facebook video that went viral on first glance. Others here are police body cam footage, dash cam footage, but those are also essential in the work that we do. Again, the next step typically that we do is organization. So we really treat this as data. For every project, we have a spreadsheet like this where we log and archive and document each piece of video that we're finding. This was for the Russia-Ukraine war that ultimately led to a published database of the videos that we verified just within the first few months of the war, so it was over 305. But this spreadsheet, one, allowed us to be so organized that we could publish such a database, but it also led to further reporting insights. So, for instance, if we were interested in understanding how many civilian residences were hit or areas with medical facilities, like a hospital, we could reference this database to further report out bigger stories or findings on the war itself. And so we've really evolved our system. I couldn't actually fit our whole spreadsheet onto one slide. So these are just kind of some of the categories that we track, but it's just an idea to say that with each video, I think there's new information we realize can become relevant. And so we like to have a category for each of those items that we might, find useful in the future. So once we've gone through finding as much visual evidence as we can, organizing it, the analysis, the digging into the material really starts. And there's several ways that we do that as well, which I will go through for reporting techniques that are more investigative, but also really speak to that verification I was talking about earlier, which in the age of AI that we're discussing, where deep fakes are more prolific or even more photoshopped or lesser advanced ways of manipulating images and video are becoming more rampant, those verification techniques become even more important. So the first thing that we'll always do is what we call geolocation, and that's confirming that an image or video in fact took place where someone is claiming it to have. I think Charlie mentioned earlier, right, that a lot of misinformation might not even be as advanced as a deep fake, but it's someone sharing an image or video saying it's from Gaza, but really was from Syria, several years ago. So in order to ward against that, we confirm where in fact it happened. This is from the Ukraine war that claimed to have taken place in Chernihiv. And what we do is look for visual cues in the background of images and videos and compare those to reliable source material. So an image or a video that you trust, that you know to be true. So in this case, you can't actually see it. Down here, you'll see there's way in the background there, there's this word that through using Google Lens, actually, you can capture the text and translate it. And so we were able to plug that into Google Maps and find this supermarket. Like I said, Google Maps in this instance is our trusted source material. I know Google Maps doesn't always work the best here, so maybe you'd use Naver or another trusted source where you're able to see an aerial view or also street view or images that people who went to those places put up. And then it's as simple as matching up the image in question with the image that you trust. So you'll see here this building is the same, this blue and red, and the ultimate name of the grocery store. You should keep in mind sometimes street viewer images are outdated, so you might see some things that don't exactly match up, but as long as you feel confident in several different landmarks matching that seem mostly permanent, you can have a high degree of confidence that that image or video took place where you think that it did. So after we've geolocated something, the next thing we often ask ourselves is, when did this happen? That could be, again, for reporting, or if you are trying to verify something, you want to make sure, okay, someone didn't edit this, they didn't cut this, I'm going to match it up. We call it syncing. So it's a way to kind of synchronize audio and visual cues in different videos. Again, one you typically want to have as a ground truth or foundation of something that you trust, but that will help you match up when a certain thing happened in a video, allowing you to have more confidence in its authenticity. This example was from a recent strike at a hospital, Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza a few weeks ago. And I don't know how much you were all following, but several different media news organizations published kind of early accounts with different videos that were floating around. As you can see, there were several sources, but they actually misidentified kind of what was going on in the air. It's very confusing. You'll see in a minute. It's not really quite clear. But through this syncing process, we were able to put together all of the different visual sources of information and understand kind of when each was happening. So that was a really helpful reporting tool.
هي الأكثر تعرضاً للصواريخ منذ بداية هذه الحرب. عمدة المدينة كانت تحدث قبل أيام عن أكثر من 1000 صاروخ طال هذه المدينة، وأكثر من 170 صاروخاً سقط بالفعل.
شكراً إلياس.
وأحدث دماراً في البنى التحتية وفي السيارات وفي المباني العامة.
So you'll see that was done through things kind of matching up with those visual cues. I'll go through this a little bit more quickly, but I will stay around for any questions. Another tactic we use is kind of geolocating something more specifically. So in this instance, this was the concert in Texas, again, that I referenced where 9 people died. It actually helped build a lot of foundation for the reporting that we did on the Seoul, the crowd crush on Halloween last year in Itaewon, because we were understanding crowd dynamics and the ways in which those things should be regulated. So in this instance, we found that the majority of people who died were all in the same quadrant of the audience at this concert, which means they were all compressed by the crowd, and there were some real accountability questions in how the stage was designed, how the crowd was regulated that could have maybe prevented their deaths. We did that through geolocation of the visuals. And this was a crowd density analysis, again, of an overhead image of the concert that allowed us to understand how many people were in that small space. Another thing we really utilize is expert analysis. You have to be tricky with this because sometimes experts will disagree, or you might not have the actual evidence that you need to say something very assertively. But this story I thought was a really good example of the US had dropped a drone in Kabul claiming to have targeted someone with militant ties, and claimed that this car blew up because there was a set of explosives in it. But we were able to collect images of the aftermath and show them to experts who said that this was inconsistent with that secondary explosion. And it really kind of questioned the official US account, and they ultimately admitted to have hit the wrong target, and that person didn't in fact have militant ties that they thought that he did. And then lastly, I mentioned 3D analysis earlier on. These are just 2 examples, but 3D reconstruction, which is a very specific skill. I cannot do it. I can do some of these other things that I showed you, but I would say is quite a helpful future technical skill in at least the work that we do, where you might not have visuals to show the entire scene, but you have enough information that you can reconstruct what did happen and show that in 3D, that ultimately can, again, lead to new findings and information. So I did want to touch briefly on the conference had asked about how to organize a long story, what you prioritize. I would say a question I always ask is, is this piece of information I want to include relevant to my main thesis? Is it explaining something in my headline? And I'll go through 2 quick examples. Again, this was a story that we published on the hospital blast in Gaza. And of course, there was a lot of different material we analyzed, a lot of different information, but we went through it chronologically, which I think helps. And we also prioritized our most important findings at the very top. And I think we tried to be really selective in what we were sharing with readers, what we were asking them to engage with. Because as you all know, audiences' attention spans can wane quite quickly. So again, asking yourself, do I need to include this piece of information? Is it speaking to my headline? Or is it just kind of interesting and I'm attached to it and I'm going to include it for that reason? Similarly, we ask ourselves the same questions when we're working on a documentary or a video. Again, this was a documentary where we looked through many hours of body camera footage and reports on a deadly shooting in Texas, and produced, I think it was about 12 minutes of a documentary. But when we were writing the script, ask ourselves that same question. Is this the focus of our story? Are we telling, people watching this something new and that they need to see? So like I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, I think a lot of the reporting techniques and the visual reporting that we do can speak not only to interesting stories, and hopefully you learned something today. I do encourage you to engage with more of our work or ask me questions if you have them, but it can not only create these maybe innovative ways within journalism to find new information. It also can ward against manipulated video, deepfakes, things that I think we'll start to see much more of in the age of AI in that verification process. So my biggest piece of advice is to do what you do best and be a good journalist, right? Treat any piece of audio or video like you would a source. A lot of times I think we have a tendency to believe what we're seeing because that is our natural tendency, but that is becoming increasingly harder to do. And so acting more with skepticism and rigor in investigating those pieces of information, I think is the most important. I'll talk through a few of those. So at the Post, before I joined the visual forensics team, I was part of the fact checker team, and we actually created a guide to manipulated video, which was meant to help people have kind of better literacy, media literacy around manipulated video or misleading video, disinformation. And we also created a guide on how to spot a fake video. So how, for journalists specifically, but also maybe your friend or your grandma might look at video in a different way before they shared it on social media and then, inadvertently spread more misinformation or disinformation. So the things that we prioritize are those 5 W's, but I'll go into them a little bit more specifically because I think they differ a bit from what you normally would ask yourself. So if you come across a video or image, you'd first ask, who is the source of this information? Do they have a history of sharing fake content? Do they have a political agenda or leaning that's obvious from their social media pages? Is it clear from what they've posted that they were at the event in question that you are reporting on? Or are they just recirculating material? And that can give you kind of a gauge of how much you're going to trust that source. Ask, what is the premise of the material? Is it particularly salacious or provocative? I think especially with deepfakes, that's, with a politician or a celebrity, that's what you're going to see is them maybe saying something that, if it feels particularly outrageous, you can question. And then the where and when are what I went over a bit more specifically. So that idea of geolocation, verifying where it happened, and the when of chronolocation, so confirming, okay, this did in fact take place in 2023, or this did take place on the date of the event that this person is claiming it did. The why is similar to what we've talked about, thinking of the motivation behind the post, so why someone is sharing it. Do they have a particular political agenda or reason for having manipulated that footage? So how many people here, I guess raise your hands if you think this photo is real. Okay, good, very good. No one raised their hand. Maybe that was a leading question. But you also may have seen these. There was a set of images that was generated by AI when Trump was facing indictment charges. I think this was from March now of this year. But they looked quite realistic if you just kind of glance at them. He looks quite real, the police officer, the background, it all looks quite convincing. They were proven to be fake like quite early on. I think they were maybe even published with the person explaining that it was fake. But if I was just coming across this without knowing that information, I thought it was interesting to do kind of an experiment of geolocation that I explained earlier. So, if I were to say, if someone showed me this photo and said, where did this happen? It looks like New York to me, like Trump could have been in New York, but I would look again for in the background for identifiable landmarks or buildings that I could therefore trust against, or I could compare to trusted information. And so I saw this word, which seems kind of made up, but I thought maybe it's a business, who knows? And I plugged it into Google. I did a reverse image search on it. These are a few different options for reverse image search, and nothing came up. It just didn't exist as any sort of business, any sort of building that I could find anywhere. So if I came across that in the course of my reporting, that would make me suspicious. Like, I can't find where this is. It should be something that is public or easily accessible. And so that would give me pause. And that's just an example of how geolocation can help you get to that finding. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is some actual other visual cues that I'm sure you all might be aware of, but are not quite, as advanced in certain deepfakes or AI-generated material. So you'll see here, this person actually only has 4 fingers, which does happen, but I think if you just glanced at this image, you could think that it's really quite real, as opposed to taking a closer look at it and really focusing in on the details of people's hands or their faces or hair that might give you that pause or that suspicion to, dig into the image a little bit deeper. So I'll go through just a few more examples of that. There were several photos, so there was a lot of material to work with. But you'll see, so again, hands are one that aren't quite there yet. Things like body parts morphing in this weird way. I think can tip you off. If you saw the image, you might think, oh, okay, they are arresting Trump. This is a police scrum of some sort. But if you take a minute to analyze the image a little bit further, it's quite obvious that these things don't seem totally normal. I think I have just one more example. In this case, this is more subtle, but it's quite interesting. It is meant to seem as if these people are chasing Trump or are going to arrest him, but if you look at their gaze, they're actually just looking past him. They're not looking at him directly. So quite subtle, but again, if you had reason to suspect that this image was fake or it wasn't lining up with what you were seeing in other news reports, making sure that you're really taking in the whole of the image and looking for things like that to make sure it all lines up. And then this is the last example, but again, just abnormalities in hands here. Sometimes hair can be very off, and in this gentleman's mouth, I think in the next slide I have, there's some weird thing going on with his teeth. So just some fun examples of AI-generated imagery that, again, I think this was one of the most, stark examples of things that people could easily believe or reshare or report on that would then have spread this misinformation that Trump was arrested in this very public way. But if you take a closer look, there are still these kind of visual cues that you can look for that would help you understand if something is AI generated. So the last piece of advice kind of in detecting AI manipulation, thinking about, again, how AI, I don't want to take away from how powerful and helpful a tool I think it can be for journalists, and that newsrooms should be exploring those. But at the same time, I think there should and will be more investment in how we detect bad actors trying to use AI for manipulation or, changing the course of certain reporting. And so the way in which we verify, I've gone through, but then I think a very important part is this cross-verification process where, if Trump in fact was arrested, there would be many media reports, many trusted media reports, and people with their phones out, right, or even an announcement probably from an official body explaining that happened. So if you're seeing a piece of information that seems, quite outlandish, and you're not seeing those other reports, you're not seeing photos, videos, trusted content and user-generated content of a public-facing event, those things I think can help maybe tip you off that you should look into this event a little bit further. But I think that's why I appreciate what a few people have talked about, like collaboration in news media, which I think is increasingly becoming something more and more news organizations do, and going to other journalists and other media to say, like, hey, did this happen? Or, I saw this come up, I think it's a little bit suspicious, like being able to, I guess, cross-reference or cross-verify in that way, I think can be really powerful. So this is where you can find me. Please don't hesitate to reach out. The bottom email is for the whole visual forensics team at the Post, and this link at the bottom is a landing page of our work. So you'll see some of the examples of the stories that I talked about, and you can also find our other coverage there if you want to learn more.